just so we're completely clear, you are not the same Vikram Chandra as the journalist.
No, although I occasionally get hate mail directed at Mr. Chandra, and I usually just ignore it.
Guys, I think I'm going to need new questions. Alright, hi, welcome to Books on Toast, Unlikely Pairings. For those of you who may have not seen the show before, Unlikely Pairings is a concept where Books on Toast throws together an unlikely pairing of people. In this case, myself, comedian and functionally illiterate person Rohan Joshi, and the very, very talented author, coder, and I think multi-hyphenate, Mr. Vikram Chandra. Whose Sacred Games is out on Netflix on the 6th of July. We're in conversation at this lovely venue called the Great Eastern Homes, which is a furniture store, an art gallery, and a performance space. And it is perfectly arty enough for this conversation, I think.
Indeed.
Right? Indeed. Feels so intellectually stimulated.
And very luxuriously expensive looking.
Extremely luxuriously expensive. Like, so luxurious, like I'm leaving my coffee cup on the floor because I'm like, idhar kuch aisa gir gaya, to matlab, मैं भी writer है, मेरे पास भी पैसा नहीं है. It's so nice to be here.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. First of all, huge fan.
Thank you.
Genuinely huge fan of the book Sacred Games. One of my favorite books of all time. So I'm going to jump straight into it. Where did the genesis of this book specifically, come from?
So it started as a kind of general curiosity, right? So everyone who's living in Bombay in the 80s and 90s, there was organized crime was so much in your face, right? Rising influence obvious in politics, in business, in real estate. Level of violence, like it was, har roz, you picked up the newspaper, cricket score ke jaisa lagta tha. 3 encounters over here,
That's
4
true.
over there. And that at that point we were living in Lokhandwala. And that famous shootout in Lokhandwala happened 3 blocks from where we lived. So my father and I were in the city one afternoon. We're driving back. We get into that main Lokhandwala ki road, and suddenly there's automatic weapons fire echoing off the buildings. I'm like, what is happening? And then my family's connected with film, so I had colleagues and friends who had been extorted. They had been threatened. Some of them had paid up,
Right.
and some of them had been shot at. And so forth.
It's a very casual sentence. Yeah, my family and friends have people who've been shot at.
Yeah. Hota hai magar.
होता है मतलब ठीक है.
No, and that was the odd thing also, right? So how fast this kind of thing gets normalized, right? So my brother-in-law, Vinod Chopra, spent a couple of years, more than that, 3 years I think, under 24-hour armed police
I
guard.
remember this in the 90s.
Yeah. So first time I went to see them at their house, and I was very freaked out by the sight of these men with weapons standing outside. Like 3 or 4 times later, I'm talking about cricket scores. Hello, bhaiya, kaise hain? And so I started to get very curious about what is this, why is it happening? And so I had written, in the book previous to that, Love and Longing in Bombay, I had written a cop story starring Sartaj Singh, the character.
Yes.
And that's a very conventional murder mystery set in Bombay. But at that time, while researching that, I had met the person who became a very good friend of mine, Hussain Zaidi.
Right.
And Hussain is actually one of the people that this book, Sacred Games, is dedicated to. I couldn't have done it without him. So I had met with Hussain while writing that story about Sartaj Singh in Love and Longing in Bombay,
Right.
and we'd become really good friends. And through him, I'd met at that time a couple of policemen, and I'd stayed friends with them as well. So when I started to think about this whole issue of organized crime, I asked all of these people, can you introduce me to other people who can talk to me about this?
Sure.
And so I just, like the way that I usually work is that somebody says, I'm having a conversation, I'm pretending to do an interview, but I'm also absorbing like whatever's in the room, right? What is in the officer's room, what kind of shoes he's wearing.
It's typical writer theft,
Right, the
right?
theft,
Where
yeah,
it's sort of like you think you're there for the person, but
Well,
you're just like,
yeah. And you never know years later what becomes useful,
Sure.
right? Yeah, it pops up. So, and at the beginning, I had a very naive idea about the book. I thought I was writing a 225-page thriller kind of thing, right? Very tight and, yes, not this thing. And I say naive because you can't...
What, 900 pages?
900 pages, yeah.
There you go.
So obviously, I should have realized that you can't write about organized crime without writing about politics, because it always there's an exchange. The reason it's organized and existent is because the political structure profits from that.
The hip bone's connected to the thigh bone, the thigh bone's connected to the knee bone.
And there's a obvious sort of exchange of value going in both directions. Mantri se bhai ko mantri se, and then all the way down.
Of course.
Yeah. So, but then suddenly you can't write about politics in today's world, and especially in that India and today's India, without talking about the uses of media and religion. So suddenly I'm writing a larger book.
Yeah.
And then I was speaking to a senior cop in Bombay one day in his office, and I was asking about a very specific incident that had happened. And he was saying, okay, I'll tell you all what I know about it, but unless you go to Delhi and meet Mr. A and Mr. B, you'll never understand what's going on. And the people that he was talking about were people in the intelligence agencies.
Yes. And then suddenly it's a book about politics, the underworld, cops, and the intelligence agencies.
James Bond also.
Just so we're clear. In case you thought there weren't enough plot strands in this book, we've got these 4 things happening now.
So the reason for that is that, like everywhere else in the world, in the subcontinent also, the intelligence agencies use the organized crime outfits for various purposes.
Of course, yeah.
So if you're trying to move men and or materials across a border, who better than your local neighborhood gangster, right?
Sure.
Who already has his connections across the border, network, he knows how to do it. You're trying to gather information.
Sure.
So again, he will become very useful in that. And then there's another exchange of value, because once you are using him, then you have to let him do certain things.
Of course.
And he'll try and push as far as he can.
And now we're entering that area of moral compromise after moral compromise. And
yeah, exactly. And then and it gets fairly dirty, because for the intelligence agencies, if you have something really like an assassination in some foreign capital where you don't want to risk exposure and you want to preserve plausible deniability, you farm it out to these guys.
Sure.
And they'll hire somebody else who might hire somebody else.
And they are now literally the men who know where the bodies are buried.
And so that job will get done, and if somebody gets caught doing it, you say, हमको क्या पता है, कोई होगा वहाँ का local matter. You know? So all of that then suddenly became this mass of material, and how to get it into a narrative and how to control it in a book became one of the big formal sort of problems or challenges of writing the book altogether.
Right.
And then it sort of found its shape and became the large thing that it is.
Which is the fascinating thing about the book actually to me, and which is why I'm actually excited that it's finally being turned into a show and not a movie. Is because when you read the book at 900 pages with all these plot strands, it definitely does feel like a world you can keep coming back to.
Right.
There's a lot of plot strands and plot threads, like for example, Sartaj's relationship with his superior. It's something that you don't ever truly sort of pay off, but you don't need to, because one of those things where almost telling the reader, here, consider this now. And that could be a separate dynamic in itself. So do you see this as a world that you want to also creatively come back to, return to? Are there stories to be told still within it?
Yeah, no, so for a long time after finishing the book, I didn't want to.
Right.
Because I had spent I think almost close to a complete decade thinking every day about people killing each other in various creative ways.
Yeah.
And thinking about...
It's a really happy book, people. It's a really happy book.
It's got humor in it, I will say that.
It is a very funny book, this is true. The gallows humor is spot on.
So, and then I didn't realize until after I'd finished how much that had messed me up, And I know that sounds very arty and high flown, but...
But if that's the world you've lived with for 10 years, your outlook is going to bend that way, right?
So then I stopped reading anything to do mafia, crime, bhai log, okay, no, enough. And then we had 2 kids, my wife and I, and then suddenly that violence also becomes too threatening in a personal way. You want to imagine a world where your kids are safe,
sure,
right? But then after this whole thing with Netflix picked up, now it's become really interesting again.
Right.
And particularly because one of the big decisions that we all mutually had to make early is that do you try and tell it as a period piece set in 2000 or 2004, or do you move it to the present time?
Okay.
And so the decision was made, which I think was a very smart one, to shoot it as a present time.
Oh, lovely. Okay. So it's more contemporary, of leaning more on contemporary political and events.
And the world has gotten, in some ways, more complex, faster, uglier, and so
it actually is even more complicated than it was then.
So I think is very promising and fun. And so I'm not working directly. They have a group of very talented writers. The first season was written by Vasant Nath and Varun Grover and Smita Singh.
All talented writers.
Amazing people in collaboration with Vikramaditya Motwane. So I was the outside consultant,
Right.
So we meet whenever I'm here, we sit down and have long meetings, and then we do email exchanges. And sometimes I drive them a little bit crazy because I'm obsessed with details. So I'll write an email. वो scene 22
You're obsessed with detail? Really? Really? No, surely not.
वो scene 22 में वो revolver बोलता है, वो revolver नहीं है, pistol है. You should call it that
nice.
So then I think I can imagine them all rolling their eyes.
Like, I can imagine Anurag Kashyap going, तू बंदूक के बारे में मुझे सिखाएगा बंदूक के बारे में.
So it's been a very happy collaboration, and I'm so fantastically eager to see how they've recreated it. And I have to say, I'm not just plugging this because it's my book or I'm attached to Netflix, but it's genuinely, I think it's compelling, it's dramatic, it's emotionally resonant, and I think fingers crossed. I would recommend it highly.
No, I'm super excited because, and again, this is not just a plug because I'm sitting here interviewing you. It is when you read the book. At least when I read the book, my first thought was, this is cinematic. This is a world that is just waiting to be dived into with a camera and a talented crew. And I'm really, really happy to see it happening. Which, to actually catch on to something else that you said, you met through the Hussain Zaid, you met a bunch of cops. And as a result of some of the stuff that's happened in our careers, also we've had to interact with the police. And I don't know, help me work this out. What is it about the police that is so compelling? Like, you meet a cop within 20 minutes, you're like, I want to hang out with this guy every day for the rest of my life. They're the modern cowboy, right? Essentially, almost.
Yeah, so, I mean, okay, so I'm going to go a bit into lecture mode.
Please go for it. Please go for it. Please.
So, because I think what's really fascinating to me is that a detective story is really truly the only really modern form, right? So if you look at other kinds of stories, love stories, stories of war and triumph, you can find parallels to those in the pre-modern world.
Sure.
Right? But the detective is a creature who appears with the Enlightenment, right?
That's actually very, very true.
And so it's the scientific method applied to the inexplicable, right?
That's true.
So you always start with a dead body, and you don't know the reason the body is dead, and then the detective, who's often an outside expert, comes in and applies deductive reasoning.
Yeah.
Clues, you find the clues, then you formulate a theory, then you prove the theory.
It's a celebration of curiosity and logic, right?
Yeah. And so it promises order, right?
Yes.
That finally everything is explicable, sab theek ho jayega, end mein the solution will be found. And so it's traveled across every culture in the last 2 centuries. And we've had it in India for, we started writing soon after, in the mid 19th century, people were doing detective fiction and crime fiction. So, and I think, like you're saying, that the cops inhabit this very grey moral world, right?
Especially in a country like India, where they are partly, in a way, they're partly our sin eaters. They're doing the things that we don't want to see, right? They are which is why beyond a point where when I read about anything, whether it's corruption, whether it's whatever, I don't know about you, but beyond a point, I can only get this angry with a cop. Because for 2 seconds, I'm like, how can this be a dereliction of duty? And then you're like, the things that man must see in 24 hours. If you're in a particularly troubled district, especially for a place like Bombay, where 21 million people are just rubbing up against each other in the complicated ways, must be, I can't even imagine the psychological...
No, and the thing is that the job demands moral ambiguity, right? So
you're
trying to catch bad guy A. So, uski information kahan pe milegi about him? You'll get it from his rival, right? So the bad guy B will become your informer. Now you have a relationship with the informer. And again, there's a patron-client relationship where then you have to allow him to do certain things.
Yes.
And I've seen this happen. Friends of mine, वो दिवाली पे एक gift basket आएगी आपको. उससे, right? तो आप gift basket रखेंगे या नहीं रखेंगे? वापस भेजेंगे. Once you've taken that gift basket, what is the nature of the relationship now?
What does that mean? Are you now, was this your 30 pieces of silver?
Right. And then also, as early in Sacred Games, what happens is that also our departments are so underfunded
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You know, and so that actual inspector in the city might not have enough money to fuel his motorcycle or his car for the entire
absolutely,
thing, right?
absolutely.
So, मतलब वो जो हफ्ता आता है, the hafta also goes to run the police department, right?
Absolutely,
So,
absolutely.
so again, you're in this very gray space, and like you're saying, then finally they also then exercise violence on our behalf.
Yeah, absolutely.
And once you enter that realm of being both the judge and the executioner, and that is very.
It's got to start playing with your head, right?
Yeah,
Beyond a point, because on the one hand, you're wrestling with the fact that I'm God.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm God, right?
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you're wrestling with the fact that, but I am very much a fallible God.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's a very, and like, yeah, exactly. And then it sucks you in, right?
And you can also get thrown under the bus at any time.
What it became for me, the book was an interesting way of exploring that whole, using those forms that are very much now, I think, part of our culture, and globally and locally, to do a kind of systems analysis of this whole mess of things that are going on around us. Yeah.
It's actually interesting that you use the word system analysis, because two questions that I have. The first one being that, like you said, there's just the inherent beauty, logic and order of procedure, right? Which one of my favorite things about this book is I think it felt like the first Indian procedural that I'd read. Like just a straightforward, detailed, nuanced procedural where the cops are pounding pavement and trying to figure out what's going on. So how did you get, I'm guessing that also involved a certain amount of help from Mr. F. Zaidi. So how did you throw yourself into that? Because one of the great things about the book is, as somebody who lived in Bombay my whole life, is one of the things that really upsets me as somebody who lived in Bombay is when I see in literature what feels like inauthentic portrayals of this city that I've sort of lived and grown up in. And Sacred Games just is the opposite of that. It, like when you're reading about somebody like a Sartaj on the street, you can smell Bombay. So how did you throw yourself?
So I think just again through endless sort of meetings and research, and then as the book got further on, and where I would have a specific question, like, you know, okay, how do you find an informer? How do you pressure an informer? Then I would go and ask a couple of guys exactly that question, right? How do you steal an election? Right. So I found a guy who had actually, and he told me, it was lovely conversation. He gave me the whole data. मतलब इतने लाख का इतने लड़के मोटरसाइकिल पे, they'll take soda water की bottle, दंगा कराएंगे, और फिर then by the time वो polling बंद हो जाएगी, then you know system. So he had a very like finely developed technique that he was willing to share with me. And the lucky thing about being a fiction writer is you always start with, "Ki, I'm not going to use your name. I will never use this to threaten you.
Yeah.
I'm just using, I want to get it right."
Yeah,
and then sometimes it's amazing how much people are willing to tell you. It's a little frightening sometimes because...
I'm sure though, right? Because sometimes you must come face to face with a revelation that is... Like,
and sometimes I felt like I don't want to be responsible for this information you are willing to give me. So don't tell me names and dates.
Right.
Because if anything ever goes wrong, then I don't want you coming back to me.
Exactly. Like, oh crap, this guy knows.
So it was exciting and a lot, like you were saying, a lot of shoe leather and like trust building, you know. And I have to say that I like doing that because the other half of writing is so isolating, right? You're sitting in a room alone for years and years. So then getting out of that and then going out into the field, as it were, and talking to people is actually very, it feels healthy, you know.
Is it, when you said it's like quite exciting, does it, when you were hanging out with these people, whether it's cops, whether it's gangsters, whether it's informant, is there ever a moment of sort of madness where it almost rubs off on you? Because when I was reading, so another great book about Bombay, which is Maximum City by Suketu Mehta, is this one great chapter where he meets a shooter. And then I think it's Chota Shakil who tells the shooter that for this guy, you do any one job for free, because I enjoyed talking to him. And Suketu Mehta had a dinner party in Cuff Parade and he tells this story and he's like, even in that room, some of the most powerful people in the country, just their excitement and fascination in knowing that I have this power was palpable. So
the last line always with meeting some of these people, अगर कोई कभी भी problem है ना तो अपने पास आने का.
Wow.
Right? So and that is a relationship you must not enter.
Oh no. Don't never make that first call, right?
Yeah. So but you're absolutely correct, and it applies as well, to the other side as well, because to be friends with the policeman in this city is also very useful, right? The old saying is that you must always know one very good doctor, one very good lawyer, and one policeman.
It's very good advice. Except if you live in Bombay, you know one very good policeman. You don't even need to know the other two.
So yeah, and sometimes it's also odd, these moments where you're sitting with somebody, and again this is like applies on both sides of the line, across from the table, who has these encounter specialists. He's killed 130 people, but he's also very charming and funny.
Yeah.
Right? And so then that sort of like cognitive dissonance of knowing that this guy has done this, but he's also a family man. He goes home and he's kind to his children and his dog, right? But on the other hand, he has no hesitation about doing what he has to do. So that kind of thing can really catch you in these moments of unreality. You can't it's like the frame is shifting and you can't bring it.
I think that's something that, at least in the book, comes to the fore a lot with like Katekar's character. Right? Because on the one hand, I think he's your representation of possibly everything wrong with the average Bombay cop, but also on so many ways he goes home, and I think that humanity is the only thing that keeps him sane.
My own personal happiest reading experiences where I've been forced into the point of view of somebody whose moral universe I cannot inhabit, but I'm forced to.
Yes.
Right? And so, I mean, and I have to say that understanding is not forgiveness, right? Like,
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
Because it's like when you read Game of Thrones, right? I don't know, when you read Game of Thrones, and I'm suddenly feeling really bad for Jaime Lannister. And I have to remind myself, guys, this began with him throwing an 8-year-old kid out of the window. Why do I like this man? What is happening here? The cognitive dissonance is huge. But it's a great...
and that's the power of fiction and art, right? That it makes us inhabit other worlds that we are not from, right? And it can like completely transport you, and then in turn transform you as well, right? Because you're not the same person you are when you started reading the book.
No, definitely not. No, especially with a book like Sacred Games, if you've ever lived in Bombay, by the time you come out at the end of the book, at least in my case, like every lane that I was in, just like, nuclear bomb idhar hai kya? Like, nuclear bomb idhar hai kya? Idhar hai kya? Nuclear bunker. Like, immediately you start to just sort of wonder what's happening behind every closed door, behind every lane, and you sort of start to suspect the innocence of everything. It's a very powerful emotion for a book to leave you with.
I mean, my last book was non-fiction, and it's about some of our real achievements in our traditional past. Are so magnificent. You don't have to exaggerate, you don't have to make things up.
Exactly.
You read about Panini's grammar for Sanskrit, it will blow your mind.
Exactly, right? It's just putting that sort of structure and syntax in place, right?
In 500 BCE, this man makes a generative grammar which becomes the basis of much of modern linguistic science.
And not just linguistic science as a whole. Exactly. A fully functional numerical system. So many actual achievements. But no, internet. We had Wi-Fi. That's what matters.
I know. And the thing is that I have to say I'm terrified now living in Trump's America because and the modern world in general, because there's always been this ability of charismatic people to persuade all the rest of us to believe in things that are palpably absurd and act on that basis.
Of course.
But now, through the amplification of these little supercomputers we carry around in our pockets, there's one country for $600,000 can buy ads and put their allegedly compromised guy on the president's seat on the other side, which is...
It is, at the end of the day, just a very sort of evil perversion of the same idea that allows a boat to be named Boaty McBoatface as a result of public voting, right? At the end of the day, it's just a very grotesque perversion of that same, like you said, the supercomputer in the pocket. It allows for that same...
No, I think, I mean, and I'm not at all, like, I'm a techie guy. I spend way too much money on toys, and I'm obsessed with this whole world of programming and stuff. But so I'm completely bullish also on the positive aspects of technology.
Absolutely.
And what we're doing right now, look at this.
Exactly.
Look at these bloody cameras. It's amazing.
It's little, every time I contemplate wireless technology, to me in my head, it's still, but fundamentally this is magic. Like in my head. When I'm like, fundamentally this is magic. Like,
And then, I mean, I still remember, I mean, as a child, going to visit my grandmother in the little village she lived in UP. There was no electricity. 8 o'clock, you know, we cooked on that chula with wood.
Wow.
And water was from the well. And now that same village has farmers carrying around, again, little supercomputers in their pocket. And I'm not exaggerating.
Our lifetime, right?
Yeah,
and
in
this
our
is
lifetime.
our lifetime,
Yeah.
that change.
So it's incredible, but it's also very dangerous. It's all of these things. Yeah?
Which is
and,
fair.
and it's fun to be alive as a writer, although sometimes now I feel like reality is outpacing anything that fiction writers
You're
could dream
telling
of.
me I'm a comedian.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do?
Do, yeah.
I open the newspaper and I'm like, what possible value add can I bring to this? What possible value add can I bring to this monstrosity?
Yeah. No, it's amazing. It's amazing. So can I ask you, how did you get into comedy?
Very randomly.
Yeah?
Yeah, very, very randomly. Because growing up, I didn't even know it existed as a career for there to be an option. So I used to work as a features writer and I did some work with Times Now. But I used to find that in all my writing, whatever little fiction, non-fiction I was writing, I just choose humor as a stylistic device. It was always my first bender. Like, how do I make this piece stand out from other pieces? Give it a slightly wry tone, give it a slightly funny tone. And then I just randomly ended up going to an open mic that Veer Das, who now is, of course, the biggest comedian in the country. And he really helped kickstart the movement in that sense. He started just hosting regular open mics that anybody could go to. And the first one I went to, the people were decent, but I had one moment of arrogance where I was like, itna to main bhi logon ko hasa sakta hu. Itna to mere se bhi hoga. And then I went up the next time, tried the open mic, 300 people in the audience. I did a joke, which I should not repeat because it was so bad. But all 300 of them laughed. And I'm sure as a writer you understand this. Validation means I'm like, I don't care if I never eat for another day, but yahi karega main abhi, pure life par. That first hit of validation. And I was like, now this is what, and since then, it's
awesome.
just been,
So, and it's also amazing that, again, this is possible. What was your parental reaction?
So the parental reaction was, so I did what I've realized is the ultimate Indian kid hack. If you want to get your parents to agree to an alternative career, two things have to happen. One, you have to either show that it pays as much as your current career. And two, and I've realized the ultimate Indian parent hack, I've said this before, get your face in a newspaper.
Yes.
Even if it's the crime page, it's fine. Once you get your page in the newspaper, that is enough ammo for your parents to carry that newspaper around to every relative going, what does your son do? This gets in newspapers. That's what my son does.
No, all the Mausis and Buas have to be shown.
Of course. Of course. And that was it. And after that, they were like, okay, cool. You continue to do what you, and touchwood, very, very supportive, right from the start. So that definitely helped. Coming to, and this is a question that I've had because I'm very, very interested in this. I believe every great writer starts off first as being a great reader. You can't have one without the other. So what were some of the books, or what are some of the books in your life that have just seized your imagination at any point, whether it was Hardy Boys at age 8 or...
No, I still remember. So I was a very nerdy little kid, as you might expect. I was the first kid in second grade to get these thick 2.5, 3.5 glasses. Right? It was a very amazing experience actually, because my teacher noticed that I couldn't see the board, so I was copying the notes from the guy next to me.
Oh, okay.
So she sent home a note, and so then I got these glasses, and I said, सुना था पत्ते होते हैं पेड़ पे, अब देखने को भी मिला. It was like suddenly the world was transformed.
Nice.
So I was very, and I've always been very bookish. And so I remember I was very young, I got Enid Blyton. Like this, I'm really aging myself generationally by saying this.
It's cool.
It's cool.
I stand proudly with you on this, yes.
Secret 7, right?
Oh, of course.
Secret, and again, remember detective fiction, right?
Yeah, of course.
So I like stayed up, that first Secret 7 I read, I stayed up late and my mother's telling me, soja out, lights off and all of this. I said, no, I have to finish.
Have to
find out who did it.
It's Secret 7, it's famous 5, but with a dog.
Exactly. So I think those were the first sort of introductions, and then I went through the usual sort of phases of coming up, the famous 5 and Bunter, and all the, in those days the comics were, ek to that Indrajal thing was huge.
Yeah,
right?
It was huge.
Vetal and Mandrake.
Yeah, Mandrake was huge. Mandrake, Phantom,
Vetal. And Chanda Mama and all of that. So I was constantly reading, and it was like a constant fight because, especially in those days, like books were like gold, right?
They really were.
Expensive, so you had to go to the circulating library, or then I would negotiate with my mother. I haven't you haven't bought me a book for a month now. You should get me one more.
I know exactly what you mean. My mother used to do this beautiful thing where growing up in Bombay around Churchgate, you still see them, but now the books are more expensive. There's just these stalls on the street with just books stacked high. And you just go there, you browse, you pick them up, and you literally buy them at like 5 rupees a book back then. And one of my happiest days were, you'd go and my mom would give me a budget. For that day. She'd be like, today you have 100 rupees to spend. And back then, 90s, 100 rupees was like gold. And like the happiest afternoon was running up and down that Churchgate street, picking up. Then judicious said, okay, this five. I had 20 books. 20 books, I have to be careful.
And fatness mattered a lot.
Of course it did. Of course it did. Fatness, continuity. If you could get a series, nothing like it.
So then... I think in my teenage years, I was reading pretty precociously, so I started to get first through school, a lot of this, into the Victorian writers. So they, that abridged version of Oliver Twist.
Illustrated abridged classics.
So from that, I wanted to start reading the real stuff. And then I think my first sort of encounter with serious American literature is that I went we lived on Nepean Sea Road at the time, and right across from what used to be Pastry Palace at that time. And so there was a little circulating library. So I'd finished all the thrillers, I was very bored, then the westerns I'd all read. So then I find this book and it has a very colorful cover. It's got a charging lion, and it's got a guy with a big rifle, and it's got a blonde woman, with a certain sort of like amplitude to her.
Of course.
Right? And I thought this looks very exciting. So I take it home and it turns out it's the short stories of Ernest Hemingway.
Oh, wow.
With a very deceptive cover.
Yeah. That sounds like a con if ever there was one.
So I start reading, and the first story was The Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber. Right?
Nice.
And so something like really clicked for me in that. I couldn't tell what was happening, but I felt the writing was doing something to me that was so powerful and so intense that I had to try and understand it. So then I had this long love affair with the American Romantics. Gatsby is one of my favorite books of all time. I try and reread it every couple of years. So all of that, and then the Victorians, and then some of the Indian writers that I encountered through school, especially in Hindi, Premchand and so forth, of that generation. All of these then became the sort of various influences. And then at some point, I started really getting interested in pre-modern Indian literary theory and poetry. So Mir Taki Mir is one of my big idols, although my Urdu is like practically non-existent. I have to look like with a kunji, I have to like get it translated. Yeah.
But you're making the effort, I think that's what counts.
So, and then ever since then, so there's certain books that I keep returning to. So Gatsby is one of them. William Makepeace Thackeray has this amazing book called Vanity Fair.
Yes.
That is just stunning. He's one of my idols. Among the Indian writers, I think Midnight's Children was an amazing reading experience, especially in terms of when I first read it, to feel that language jump off the page and have it act on you, and to realize that you didn't have to write the English, the proper English.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because that's going to be my follow-up question, because so much of, and this is with obviously no disrespect to all of the people that have made the effort, but there's a certain tradition of Indian writing in English where it feels like the author is trying to show that I know the language, right? There's almost a sort of feels like a slight struggle for credibility in that sense. And I understand all the sort of racial and these things that come with that, but Midnight Children was very refreshing for that reason. And that's actually another reason Sacred Games was so refreshing. Where when I'm reading it, it feels like this person is not struggling to make me feel their intellect. I'm just rolling with it and it feels natural.
No, I mean, I think that for me also the effort was, if I was telling one of these stories to a friend of mine in a bar, say in Bandra, the way that I would tell it, I would we would sprinkle the English with Hindi words, Marathi words, we would switch between several languages. So I wanted to create a language true to that experience. And actually, to make a big circle round to the series, one of the amazing things about working with Netflix is that they don't care what language you shoot your stuff.
Oh, of course they don't care. They have the ultimate proof of concept. Their biggest show is Narcos, which is like 75% non-English.
So what you'll see on screen, which is wonderful, is that people in the series talk exactly like all of us do, right? We are speaking English. I might turn to my friend here and speak in Hindi.
Yeah, of course.
He might go outside and speak in Marathi. So the entire scenes in Punjabi, the entire scenes in Marathi, with no
self-conscious. Because that's the culture we live in, right? We are code switching constantly, while in our head. So that makes sense. The other thing that I wanted to ask about, and this is just from a personal this thing, are you at all a science fiction fan?
I am. I read a lot of science fiction.
Because Sacred Games does have a touch of the dystopian science fiction novel to it. Just in that first encounter with Guy Tonday's gleaming cube. You know, its appearance to me, it feels a lot like the appearance of the monolith in 2001 almost. So it's just, where does this appear in Bombay and what does it mean?
No, I do. I've never, some of my earliest stories that I wrote that I published in my school magazine at my boarding school were Isaac Asimov influenced sci-fi stories.
Nice.
So that I was a big Asimov fan. And
Asimov, Robot Asimov or Foundation Asimov?
Both.
Okay,
Both. But first Robot.
Right.
First Robot.
Right.
Yeah. So I've never tried to write it. I've written magical realism in Red Earth and Pouring Rain, but like hard sci-fi, maybe it's something I'll try and do at some point.
I mean, come on. Code and it's just waiting to happen. Right? Come on.
Yeah. No, but there's a writer I want to recommend to everyone. If you haven't read him, he's my favorite sci-fi writer, Ian M. Banks.
Ian M. Banks, that's spelled I-A-I-N. Yes, there we go.
There we go. And he's an amazing man. As Ian Banks, he would write literary fiction, and as Ian M. Banks, he would write sci-fi. Nice. And he's got a series called the Culture series. And if you,
I have not read it actually. I really appreciate the recommendation. Thank you.
It's delicious. I envy people who haven't read Ian M. Banks yet, because then I reread him. But the experience of reading Banks for the first time.
In that case, it's time to envy me, Vikram.
Yes.
Because I have never read Ian M. Banks, sadly, but I will correct. Yeah. Have you read the, speaking of, like, I'm just going to throw recommendations at you because I've loved it so much. Have you read The Three-Body Problem?
I have not yet. It's
trilogy.
On my list.
It's quite fascinating. Again, it's for me one of the most provocative pieces of science fiction I've read in a very, very long time. And again, because it's so married to the sort of current Chinese condition, and then where the entire starting premise is what if China made first contact.
Oh, I see.
Literally. And that's the starting point of the series. And the philosophical implications of it are...
Okay. So I will go home and get it on my Kindle, because
it's available on the Kindle.
Fiction.
Yeah, absolutely. Three-Body Problem, The Dark Forest, and Death's End. Those are the 3 books.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes. Okay. And I will read all of Ian M. Banks.
And I also, there's like Vandana Singh is somebody who writes Indian sci-fi.
Okay.
I'm curious about why there's not more Indian sci-fi.
I wonder if it's just because we're so trapped in our grand mythological tradition that we don't want to snap to...
No, and I'm actually very excited about the popular rediscovery of the past, right? Like all this, like all my friend Ashwin Sanghi writing, Chanakya's Chant and all of that, and other young writers who are working with all these incredible panoramas of the past that are hugely, like, sort of waiting for somebody to write them.
Absolutely.
In English and in other languages, and writers in Hindi and in other regional languages have been doing this for decades, centuries. So I think it's interesting sociologically that it's happening now, because I think people, in trying to figure out what we are going to go forward to become, are trying to look in the past.
Look in the past, which is not a bad thing if you can contextualize it, right? If you can, like, and in a way it's almost frustrating, like you said, that there hasn't been more of it. Because sometimes it's almost frustrating that you will pick up foreign authors who have in some ways tackled our mythology better than we have, like a Roger Zelazny and a Lord of Light. I don't know if you've read it or not. It's a more scathing indictment of some of the complexities of the Indian religious system than any Indian book that I at least personally have read. And I'm like, man, to have this engaged with by an Indian author who understands more would just be so much more fascinating.
No, I'm very hopeful. And I mean, I think we're going through a kind of renaissance at the moment, right? Because I think, I mean, one of the things that I've really started to believe in the last few years is that our dark ages have just happened. Right? Because, I mean, our classical civilization continued uninterrupted well into the 18th century. And we were taught by the colonialists that India had, quote unquote, degenerated, right? And that therefore they had to come in. And that is an absolute lie. The 17th and 18th centuries in India, although there was political unrest, were a time of great intellectual ferment and creativity, poetic creativity, artistic creativity, right? And then this fracture happens for 2 centuries, and we get this, like, poverty, we get the depredation of the economic system. And so now we are coming up from that, and it's like a manthan, It's like there's both poison and
The great churn.
churn.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, as happened in the Renaissance in Europe, right? So normally when we think of the Renaissance in Europe, we always like figure it in the imagination as a time of enlightenment and progress. But that was also what gave birth to some of the most regressive nationalisms,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
Destructiveness. Where did where did Mao and Stalin and Hitler come from? They came exactly from enlightenment and Renaissance.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a very exciting time for me as a watcher of popular culture also, right?
Yeah.
And then what you guys are doing in terms of comedy in the popular sphere, of political satire, all of this, it's such an exciting time. And the films that are now coming out, the smaller,
I think that for me is a cultural switch that I'm hoping happens a little quicker, which is that overall, as a popular entertainment culture, we just start to worship story and writing a little more over the current economy, which is extremely sort of star and talent driven, which I think just wrecks the economics, right? Which is why today, I think these streaming platforms, it's not a plug, it's just new homes for smaller stories.
Right? Absolutely,
Like, it's just so gratifying to see.
Yeah, and I'm very excited by some of this, the programs that I've seen.
Yeah.
It's freer, it's more open, and then we also have the big giants coming in with new platforms. So all of this together makes for a very exciting combination.
I think it does, and I think unlike TV where you're going to be like locked down to one screen, you have multiple screens, means I think people, at least for the foreseeable future, are going to throw opportunity at everything to see if it sticks before they decide one way or another that this is the genre that'll work. And what is up for you next?
I have some fiction that I'm working on. I have been working on for like the last 6 or 7 years that I'll get back to.
Okay, nice. Nice. So you've been working on it for 6-7 years and you still have to get back. Is it going to be...
No.
Is it going to be this big? It's going to be this big this time?
No, it got interrupted twice, right? First by that non-fiction book.
Sure.
And then the software stuff started up. So now I'm hoping that everything will calm down and I'll get back to it. And then also the work for the second season of Sacred Games is already ongoing.
Oh wow, that was quick.
Yeah, and I'm not a part of the writing room, but I'm attached to it as a kind of consultant, and so I work with them on that, and that's very exciting also.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I have 2 more questions. One is your family history is actually, your family connections is quite fascinating. Your mum, Kamna, wrote in 1942 a love story. One of your sisters is Tanuja Chandra, who's a very popular filmmaker in her own right. Your other sister is Anupama Chopra, who is an extremely fantastic film critic. And so I guess what I'm trying to ask you is, what does it feel like to be the black sheep of the family? No, I'm kidding.
No, I mean, I think we all blame it on my mother because we all grew up. She used to write when we lived in Delhi. She used to write for All India Radio.
Right.
And would be on television, both writing and performing. And then when we moved to Bombay, one day she was writing as usual on the kitchen table, and she says, "This story can only be made by Raj Kapoor." And we all looked at her like, "Acha, thoda, you're going a little over." But she's like an amazing woman. She just called up the studio, and then one day suddenly she gets into a taxi and goes and has a meeting with the man in his cottage. Story sitting on the, it still happens, right? Where you don't have a script, you actually go and verbally recite the story, and then narrate it. And she made the man cry, right? So the next thing we know that she's the story writer of this big film called Prem Rog that was her first movie. So I think, both my parents have been amazingly supportive, which is why I was asking about like what happened with you.
No, touch wood, very supportive.
Yeah. In that, but she also knew being a writer, that being a writer is no way to live a life, right? Because
that is, of all the wise things Vikram Chandra has said so far on this interview, that is the wisest.
No, because, like in those days, All India Radio, you write a 1-hour play, you also act in it, and you get a check for 100 rupees, right?
Yeah.
And so what do you do with that? So she was always, beta, writer kyun banoge? You get good marks in engineering, in science and math. Please go and become an engineer. Or,
It's like a comedy sketch where the artist parent is like, "Mera beta engineering hi karega. Tu artist banega, kabhi nahi."
And then my dad, amazingly enough, the corporate guy, he was like, "Nahi, if you want to do it, I'll support you. Just do it well."
Imagine how jaded he was by the corporate life for him to say that to you.
And then he did it for my sisters as well, right? So they've been a rock of support for all of us and kept us going during the lean years.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And so now she's very happy, as you know, paper mein naam aa gaya, to bas.
Of course, done. हो गया. Paper में छोड़ माँ, अब Netflix पे नाम आ गया. And I'm going to close with one last super cliched question, only because I would be failing in my duty if I didn't ask it. Any learnings or any sort of tips or just golden rule that you have for writers? Your learning from all this thing. Not any prescriptive necessarily, or just a way of staying sane.
No, you already said one thing that I always tell my students is that you have to read. And read, and it's a line actually that I believe was William Yeats. He said, read what gives you pleasure, write about what disturbs you, right? So that, and I think that is that's what drives me, right? So that you must, I mean, I've always had this appetite for reading. I can't imagine going through a day without reading something or the other, right?
Right.
And then if there's something that stays with you that you're obsessive about, then what that means is that thing has energy and it's trying to call out to you to investigate. Okay. And then you must go towards it because that obsessiveness means that there is something rich within it. And obsessiveness, I think also it must be true in your field also, is what carries you through the dark days.
Yes.
Yeah? You know, the days of like self-doubt and like, is this worth doing? Do I have any talent?
Every day, basically. Every day.
So then what carries you through that is that, no, this thing that is bugging me, I have to do it.
Just exercise this demon. I just have to.
Yeah.
And until then.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vikram, for this very, very insightful and entertaining chat. I've had a lovely time. Everybody watching, Sacred Games is available at all major bookstores and online retailers. Obviously, please read the book. It's fantastic. The show hits Netflix on the 6th of July, season 1. Indeed. All episodes will be streaming on the 6th of July. We hope you enjoy it. Good luck. I can't wait to see what it looks like. And also, please don't forget to subscribe to Books on Toast for more interviews like this and a lot of other great content. And again, thank you.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure.